You watch people with less skill get promoted while you work twice as hard and get better results. Every day you put in the effort, but somehow others move ahead of you while you stay stuck in the same place. I am Sun Tzu, the ancient war strategist who learned how to become unbeatable on the battlefield, where one wrong move meant death. What I discovered about becoming truly unbeatable will change how you handle every challenge in your life, giving you the one rule that has kept leaders winning for over 2,500 years. The same idea that won battles before they even started can make you unstoppable in whatever you want to achieve. But first, like this video, subscribe for more ancient wisdom, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which part of the world is ready to become unbeatable. I want you to understand something about me that most people never learn. I wasn't born a master strategist. I wasn't handed power or position. I started as nobody special in the chaotic spring and autumn period of ancient China, when kingdoms rose and fell like morning mist. My father was a minor official who served whichever lord paid him enough to feed our family. We moved constantly, always chasing the next opportunity, always hoping this time would be different. I watched him work harder than anyone else, staying late into the night, copying documents and preparing reports, yet other men with connections and smooth words advanced while he remained stuck in the same position year after year. Sound familiar? That frustration you feel when merit doesn't seem to matter. I lived it every day of my childhood. I remember holding my wooden practice sword, worn smooth from countless hours of training. While other boys played games, I studied the art of war, convinced that if I just worked harder, trained longer, and prepared better, success would come naturally. I believed in the myth that effort alone guarantees results. My first real lesson came when I was 16. A respected general visited our town, and I was chosen to demonstrate swordplay for his entertainment. I had trained for this moment my entire life. My technique was flawless, my dedication obvious, my passion unmistakable. Yet after my performance, he barely glanced at me before turning to speak with the local lord's lazy son, who couldn't hold a sword properly but whose father controlled the grain supplies. That night, I sat alone with my practice sword, finally understanding what my father had never grasped. Raw effort, no matter how sincere or skilled, means nothing without strategic thinking. The general didn't care about my sword work, he cared about who could help him achieve his larger goals. The Lord's son had value not because of what he could do, but because of where he was positioned in the network of power and resources. That wooden sword taught me my first strategic principle: your personal capability matters far less than your understanding of how capability fits into the larger situation. Most people spend their entire lives perfecting skills that don't address the real game being played around them. I began watching instead of just practicing. I studied how decisions were really made, how alliances formed and dissolved, how information flowed through networks of influence. I learned that every interaction was part of a larger pattern, and those who understood the pattern controlled the outcomes. This shift in thinking changed everything for me. Instead of just training my body, I began training my mind to see situations clearly. Instead of focusing only on my own improvement, I began understanding how my improvement fit into the world around me. That wooden practice sword became a symbol of my transformation from someone who worked hard to someone who thought strategically. The boy who believed effort alone would be rewarded died that day. In his place rose someone who understood that true strength comes not from what you can do, but from knowing exactly when, where, and how to apply what you can do for maximum effect. The torn silk banner hanging in my tent belonged to General Wei, a man I had respected more than any other military leader of our time. He was brilliant, courageous, and beloved by his troops. He was also dead, and his army was scattered across the valley below like leaves in an autumn wind. I had begged to serve under Wei because of his reputation. Everyone said he was unbeatable in direct combat, that his tactical knowledge was beyond question, that his men would follow him into the gates of hell itself. All of this was true. Yet here I stood, staring at his banner, trying to understand how such a perfect general could suffer such a complete defeat. The enemy commander who destroyed Wei wasn't particularly brave. His troops weren't better trained. His weapons weren't superior. In fact, in a fair fight between equal forces, Wei would have crushed him without breaking a sweat. But this commander understood something. Wei didn't. He understood that fair fights are for fools. Instead of meeting Wei's army in the mountain pass where Wei expected him, this commander had spent 3 weeks moving his forces into position on the high ground overlooking our supply lines. While Wei prepared for the battle he wanted to fight, his enemy prepared the battle that needed to be fought. Wei's superior tactics meant nothing when his army ran out of food and water before the real fighting even began. I watched Wei pace frantically in his tent the night before our retreat, studying maps and planning brilliant maneuvers that would never matter. He kept saying, "If we can just get them to face us directly, we'll show them what real soldiers can do." He never understood that getting them to face us directly was exactly what they were determined to prevent. Wei died not because he lacked courage or skill, but because he focused on being right instead of being effective. He spent his energy perfecting his ability to win the battle he wanted, rather than preparing for the battle that was actually happening. His enemy spent that same energy making sure the battle Wei wanted could never take place. That torn banner became my greatest teacher. Every time I looked at it, I remembered that being objectively better at your craft means nothing if you don't understand the conditions under which your craft will be tested. Wei was the finest tactical commander I ever knew, but he lost because he never learned to see beyond his own expertise to the larger, strategic reality. The commander who defeated Wei wasn't a better general, he was a better student of his situation. While Wei perfected his strengths, his enemy studied Wei's weaknesses and the environmental factors that could exploit them. While Wei prepared to demonstrate his superiority, his enemy prepared to make that demonstration impossible. This is why I learned to love the battlefield more than the training ground. Training teaches you what you can do. The battlefield teaches you what actually matters. Training rewards perfection. The battlefield rewards understanding. Every victory and every defeat became a lesson in the difference between being capable and being effective. Most people never learn this distinction. They keep perfecting their capabilities while remaining blind to the conditions that determine whether those capabilities will ever matter. They become like Wei, exceptional at skills that circumstances render irrelevant. The moment of revelation came during the siege of Yangzhou, when I found myself commanding a force half the size of the enemy's. With winter approaching and our supplies running dangerously low, every conventional strategy pointed toward certain defeat. My advisors urged retreat. The enemy commander, drunk on his numerical advantage, had already begun celebrating his inevitable victory. But as I sat alone in my tent that night, studying the single strip of bamboo on which I had begun writing my observations about warfare, everything suddenly became clear. All my scattered insights, all the lessons from countless battles and defeats, crystallized into one simple truth that changed how I approached every challenge for the rest of my life. The rule is this: know yourself and know your situation completely. That's it. Not partially, not mostly, completely. I know it sounds almost insultingly simple. Most people hear this and think they already understand it. They'll tell you, of course, I know myself and my situation, but they don't. They know what they want to believe about themselves and their situation. They know the comfortable version, the version that doesn't require them to change or face difficult truths. This rule works in any situation. because it eliminates the two sources of all strategic failure: self-deception and situational blindness. When you truly know yourself, your real strengths, your actual weaknesses, your genuine motivations, your authentic capabilities, you stop wasting energy on approaches that don't match your reality. When you truly know your situation, the real constraints, the actual opportunities, the genuine motivations of others, the authentic flow of power and resources, you stop fighting battles that can't be won and missing opportunities that are right in front of you. Why do most people fail at this, despite its simplicity? Because knowing requires admitting. Admitting that you're not as strong as you want to be. Admitting that your situation is not what you wish it were. Admitting that your previous approach has been based on comfortable illusions rather than uncomfortable truths. At Yangzhou, complete self-knowledge forced me to admit that my army couldn't win through direct assault or extended siege. We simply didn't have the numbers or supplies. But it also revealed that we had something the enemy didn't expect: mobility and detailed knowledge of the local terrain from months of careful preparation. Complete situational knowledge revealed that the enemy commander's confidence was making him careless. His supply lines were extended and poorly guarded because he couldn't imagine needing them for long. His troops were already mentally celebrating, which meant their discipline was relaxing. Most importantly, the approaching winter that threatened us also threatened them, but they weren't preparing for it, because they expected to be done fighting long before it mattered. The rule has two parts that must work together. Self-knowledge without situational knowledge leads to perfectly executed plans that address the wrong problem. Situational knowledge without self-knowledge leads to brilliant strategies that you don't have the capability to execute. When both parts work together, something remarkable happens. You stop guessing and start knowing. You stop hoping and start planning. You stop reacting and start positioning. You become unbeatable, not because you're stronger than everyone else, but because you're operating from complete information while they're operating from partial understanding and wishful thinking. This is the foundation of everything else I'm going to teach you. I developed my practice of brutal self-honesty beside a still mountain pool that served as my mirror during long campaigns. Every morning before dawn, I would sit beside that water and force myself to see clearly, not the commander I wanted to be, but the commander I actually was on that particular day. Most people lie to themselves constantly about their abilities, and these lies kill them in competitive situations. They tell themselves they're great communicators when they're actually confusing. They believe they're natural leaders when they're actually just loud. They think they're strategic thinkers when they're actually just worriers who call their anxiety planning. I learned to ask myself questions that cut through comfortable self-deception. Not, am I brave, but what specific situations make me hesitate, and how does that hesitation affect my decision-making? Not, am I intelligent, but what types of problems consistently confuse me, and how can I structure my approach to compensate for these blind spots? The reflection pool taught me that knowing your limitations is infinitely more powerful than pretending they don't exist. When I admitted to myself that I was naturally impatient, I could design systems to force myself to gather information before acting. When I acknowledged that I tended to trust people too quickly, I could create verification processes that protected me from my own optimism. I catalogued my real skills versus my imagined ones with ruthless precision. I was excellent at seeing patterns in large amounts of information, but poor at remembering specific details without notes. I was naturally good at inspiring loyalty in people who worked directly with me, but struggled to influence people I only met occasionally. I was strong at developing long-term strategy, but weak at adjusting tactics quickly when circumstances changed unexpectedly. This wasn't self-criticism. It was strategic intelligence gathering about my most important resource, myself. Every weakness I identified became a problem I could solve through preparation, systems, or partnerships. Every strength I accurately assessed became a tool I could deploy with confidence when the situation called for it. I developed specific questions that I asked myself before every important decision. What am I hoping will happen that might not happen? What am I assuming about my own capabilities that might not be true? What emotional state am I in? And how is that affecting my judgment? What would I advise someone else to do in this exact situation? The daily practice of honest self-evaluation became my secret weapon because it gave me information my enemies didn't have about their most dangerous opponent, myself. While they were guessing about my capabilities and motivations, I knew exactly what I could and couldn't deliver under pressure. Self-knowledge also meant understanding my authentic motivations, not just the noble ones I wanted to claim. I fought, partly for honor and duty, but also for recognition and the thrill of intellectual challenge. Admitting this didn't make me shallow, it made me predictable to myself, which meant I could account for how these motivations would affect my choices. The hardest part of self-knowledge is accepting that you are exactly who you are right now, not who you might become with enough effort. You must work with your actual capabilities today while building toward greater capabilities tomorrow. Most people spend so much energy pretending to be someone else that they never develop the person they actually are. The Scout's map spread across my table was covered with markings that told the real story of our situation, not the story my officers wanted to believe, but the story that would determine whether we lived or died. Every enemy position, every supply line, every natural barrier was marked with careful precision, because wars are won by understanding what is, not what you wish were true. I learned to see what others missed by developing 3 levels of situational awareness that most people never master. The first level is immediate circumstances, what's happening right now in your direct environment. The second level is systemic patterns, how current events fit into larger, ongoing trends and relationships. The third level is underlying forces, the deeper currents of motivation, resource flow, and power dynamics that create the circumstances you can observe. Most people focus on the wrong information entirely. They pay attention to what people say instead of what people do. They notice obvious events while missing subtle changes that signal major shifts coming. They react to surface drama while ignoring the structural realities that actually determine outcomes. My system for gathering intelligence without being obvious started with understanding that information flows through predictable channels. Servants know what their masters really think. Suppliers understand economic pressures before leaders do. Border guards see changes in movement patterns before generals plan their next campaigns. The key was learning to listen to people who had access to truth but no reason to hide it from someone they didn't see as a threat. I developed the practice of asking indirect questions that revealed more than direct ones ever could. Instead of asking, "What are your lord's military plans?" I would ask, "How has the demand for grain and weapons changed in recent weeks?" Instead of asking, "Is your army preparing for battle?" I would ask, "Have you noticed any changes in the roads and supply routes lately?" People would answer these questions honestly because they didn't realize they were giving away strategic information. Reading people's real motivations required understanding the difference between what they said they wanted and what their actions revealed they actually prioritized. A general might claim to value honor above all else, but if he consistently chose safer strategies over bolder ones, his real priority was survival, not glory. A lord might speak constantly about loyalty, but if he frequently changed alliances when offered better terms, his real priority was advantage, not honor. Understanding constraints was often more valuable than understanding intentions. A commander might want to attack immediately, but if his supply situation forced him to wait for reinforcements, his desires were irrelevant. A kingdom might prefer to avoid conflict, But if their economic pressures required controlling certain trade routes, their preferences would eventually bow to necessity. I learned that timing depends entirely on understanding the current moment perfectly. The same action that fails completely in one set of circumstances succeeds brilliantly when conditions shift slightly. Most people rush into action without understanding whether the moment is right, or they wait too long because they don't recognize when circumstances have aligned in their favor. The most crucial skill was learning to distinguish between temporary situations and permanent changes. A drought might last one season or transform an entire region permanently. A political alliance might be a brief convenience or signal a fundamental shift in power relationships. Responding to temporary situations as if they were permanent wastes resources. Responding to permanent changes as if they were temporary courts disaster. This constant analysis of real conditions became my foundation for every decision, while others operated on assumptions, hopes, and incomplete information. I operated on verified understanding of what was actually happening and why it was happening that way. I keep a piece of granite from the mountain peak, where I won my most decisive victory in my personal collection, not because of the battle itself, but because of what that stone represents about the power of superior positioning. From that high ground, my smaller force could see everything happening in the valley below while remaining invisible to our enemies. We controlled every approach, commanded every escape route, and turned what should have been our weakness, our smaller numbers, into irrelevant detail. Position determines outcome before action begins. This is the most fundamental truth of all strategic thinking, yet most people completely ignore it. They focus on building their capabilities while paying no attention to where they're trying to deploy those capabilities. They work harder and harder from increasingly disadvantaged positions, then wonder why their efforts produce such poor results. I learned to choose my battles based on position first, strength second. A mediocre force in a superior position will defeat a superior force in a mediocre position almost every time. This principle applies whether you're fighting for territory, competing for a promotion, building a business, or trying to influence someone's opinion. There are three types of positioning that determine your effectiveness in any situation. Physical positioning is about geography, timing, and resource placement, being in the right place at the right time with the right tools. Social positioning is about relationships, reputation, and influence networks, being connected to the right people who trust your judgment and want to see you succeed. Strategic positioning is about role, responsibility, and decision-making authority, being positioned to make the choices that matter most to the outcome you want. Most people fight from disadvantaged positions unnecessarily because they don't understand that positioning is a choice, not a circumstance. They accept whatever position they're given instead of deliberately moving toward positions that multiply their effectiveness. They compete directly against stronger opponents instead of changing the terms of competition to favor their particular strengths. I once turned a seemingly hopeless position into a winning one by recognizing that what looked like a disadvantage was actually an opportunity for superior positioning. My army was trapped in a narrow valley with enemies controlling the high ground on both sides. Every conventional approach led to slaughter. But that narrow valley also meant the enemy forces couldn't coordinate effectively with each other, and their positions on the opposite ridges meant they couldn't support each other without risking hitting their own troops. Instead of trying to fight our way out directly, I positioned my forces to make the two enemy groups suspicious of each other's movements. By carefully controlling what information each side could see about our activities, I created a situation where each enemy force began to believe the other was preparing to betray them. Within 2 days, they were fighting each other while we quietly relocated to truly advantageous ground. The patience required to wait for the right position is what separates strategic thinkers from reactive ones. Most people feel pressure to act immediately when challenged, which forces them to fight from whatever position they happen to be in at the moment. Strategic thinkers understand that accepting a temporary disadvantage in order to gain a permanent advantage is almost always the superior choice. Superior positioning makes victory look effortless to outside observers, but it requires careful analysis and preparation that most people aren't willing to invest. You must study the terrain, physical, social, and strategic, until you understand how to make it work for you instead of against you. You must be willing to take longer paths that lead to better positions instead of shorter paths that lead to harder battles. When you truly understand positioning, you realize that most of what people call luck is actually the result of consistently choosing advantaged positions over time. Lucky people don't have better circumstances, they have better positioning relative to the circumstances everyone faces. The sword that hangs in my study has never been drawn in actual combat, yet it helped me win more victories than any weapon I ever used in battle. This undrawn blade represents the supreme excellence of strategism, doing your opposition without ever having to fight them directly. My greatest victory required no violence, no dramatic confrontation, no heroic charges across bloodied fields. Instead, it required 6 months of patient maneuvering that made conflict unnecessary. The opposing commander was skilled, his army was well-trained, and his position was defensible. In a direct fight, the outcome would have been uncertain, at best costly, regardless of who won. But I understood something he didn't. Every conflict exists within a larger context of relationships, resources, and competing interests. Instead of focusing on defeating his army, I focused on making his army irrelevant to his lord's actual goals. I began by studying what his lord truly needed, not what he claimed to want, but what his circumstances forced him to prioritize. His kingdom was facing economic pressure from trade disputes with neighboring regions. His real problem wasn't military, it was diplomatic and commercial. His army was a solution to the wrong problem. Through careful intelligence gathering, I learned that his lord's primary concern was securing trade agreements that would restore his kingdom's prosperity. The military posturing was actually a negotiating tactic intended to improve his position in those trade discussions, not a genuine desire for territorial conquest. Once I understood the real game being played, I could change my approach entirely. Instead of preparing to resist military invasion, I began working to address the underlying economic pressures that made the military threat seem necessary. I opened diplomatic channels with the same neighboring regions that were causing his kingdom's trade problems. Over several months, I helped negotiate trade agreements that gave his lord most of what he actually needed without requiring any military action at all. By the time his army was fully prepared for the campaign he had planned, his lord no longer needed that campaign to achieve his actual objectives. This is how you make opposition irrelevant instead of fighting it. You identify what your opponents actually need to accomplish. Then you address those underlying needs through methods that don't require defeating you. When people's real problems are solved, their motivation to fight you disappears naturally. The art of making your success inevitable works the same way. Instead of building the strength to overcome all possible resistance, you shape circumstances so that resistance becomes pointless. You make it easier for people to support your goals than to oppose them. You align your objectives with forces that are already moving in your direction. Most people see every challenge as a direct confrontation between their will and someone else's will. They approach problems by gathering resources to overcome resistance through superior force. This approach works sometimes, but it's exhausting, risky, and creates enemies who will look for opportunities to even the score later. Strategic thinking recognizes that most resistance comes from unmet needs, unaddressed concerns, or misaligned incentives, not from fundamental opposition to your goals. When you address the real sources of resistance, the resistance itself often dissolves. This approach requires tremendous patience and preparation that most people aren't willing to invest. It's much more emotionally satisfying to fight your way through problems than to think your way around them. Direct confrontation feels active and decisive. Strategic maneuvering feels slow and uncertain, but the results speak for themselves. The commander who never had to draw his sword kept all his soldiers alive, preserved his resources for future challenges, and won more completely than any victory through battle could have achieved. His opponent's army wasn't destroyed, was simply redirected toward objectives that didn't conflict with our own. When you master this approach, you discover that most conflicts are unnecessary. Most problems have solutions that don't require anyone to lose. Most resistance dissolves when you address its real causes instead of its surface manifestations. The shadow on my ancient sundial moves at the same steady pace every day, yet there are moments when that shadow's position makes all the difference between success and failure. Timing transforms ordinary actions into extraordinary results, and perfect actions into disasters. I learned this lesson through my most expensive mistake. Brilliantly planned attack launched exactly 2 days too early. Every element of the strategy was flawless. My troops were perfectly prepared. Our intelligence was accurate. Our tactical approach was superior. But I moved before the enemy's internal conflicts had reached the breaking point. I had been carefully cultivating, instead of attacking a divided force that was already questioning their commander's leadership. I attacked a unified army that rallied around their leader in response to external threat. My premature action turned their weakness into strength and their doubt into determination. What should have been a decisive victory became a costly stalemate that taught me never to confuse good strategy with good timing. The right action at the wrong time fails because timing affects everything about how your action will be received, interpreted, and responded to. The same proposal that gets rejected immediately in one context becomes obviously brilliant when conditions shift slightly. The same request that annoys people today becomes welcome next week when their priorities change. I developed the ability to recognize the perfect moment to move by learning to read the signs that indicate when conditions are ideal. These signs are different for every situation, but they follow predictable patterns. Internal pressure builds until people become eager for change. External circumstances align until resistance weakens. Information becomes available that creates brief windows of opportunity. The key is understanding that these optimal moments are created by forces beyond your control, but your preparation determines whether you can recognize and capitalize on them when they arrive. Most people miss their moments because they're not ready when conditions align. Others force action when conditions aren't right because they're tired of waiting. Building toward the right moment requires maintaining readiness while resisting premature action. This is one of the most difficult aspects of strategic thinking, because readiness is expensive and waiting is psychologically uncomfortable. You must invest resources in preparation for opportunities that might not come, while disciplining yourself not to waste that preparation on inferior opportunities. I learned to use the waiting time productively by continuing to shape conditions in my favor. Instead of passive waiting, I engaged in active preparation that gradually improved my position and increased the likelihood that favorable conditions would emerge. Every day of apparent inaction was actually a day of invisible progress toward the moment when action would be most effective. The discipline of waiting for your moment requires incredible mental strength because everyone around you will pressure you to act prematurely. People confuse activity with progress, movement with advancement. They become uncomfortable with preparation phases and want to see immediate action, even when immediate action would waste everything you've built. I developed the practice of asking myself specific questions before any major action. Have the conditions I've been waiting for actually emerged? Or am I just tired of waiting? Is this the best opportunity I'm likely to get? Or am I settling for a mediocre opportunity because it's available now? Will this action be more effective today than it would be next week? Or am I moving because of internal pressure rather than external readiness? Perfect timing makes success look effortless to observers, but it's actually the result of patient observation, careful preparation, and disciplined restraint. When you move at exactly the right moment, everything flows naturally, because you're working with forces that are already in motion, rather than against forces that are still building resistance. I keep a piece of bamboo from the forest, where I learned my most important lesson about flexibility, while the rigid oak trees around it snapped in the storm winds. This bamboo bent so far it touched the ground, then sprang back upright when the wind passed. The strongest material in nature survives, not through resistance, but through intelligent adaptation. Rigid plans fail when conditions change because they're designed for circumstances that no longer exist. I learned this during a campaign where my carefully prepared strategy became worthless when our enemy alliance unexpectedly fragmented into 3 separate groups with conflicting objectives. My detailed battle plans assumed we were fighting one coordinated force, not 3 independent armies with different motivations and capabilities. The commanders who insisted on following our original strategy were defeated within days. They kept trying to execute tactics designed for a completely different situation, like using a key for a lock that had been changed. Their rigidity turned their expertise into a liability because they couldn't let go of approaches that were no longer relevant. But I had learned to distinguish between changing tactics and changing direction. My core objective, controlling the mountain passes, remained constant. My strategic principles, superior positioning, divided enemy attention, controlled information flow, remained constant. What changed was how I applied these constant elements to new circumstances. Instead of fighting 3 groups as if they were one unified force, I began treating them as 3 separate problems with 3 different solutions. Instead of trying to defeat them all simultaneously, I focused on keeping them divided while addressing them individually. Instead of using the same approach for each group, I adapted my methods to each group's specific motivations and capabilities. My system for staying flexible while remaining focused starts with clearly separating what must not change from what can change freely. Your fundamental objective must remain stable, that's your North Star. Your core principles must remain stable, those are your navigation tools. But your specific methods, timing, partnerships, and tactical approaches must remain completely flexible based on current conditions. Reading changing conditions requires constant attention to information that contradicts your current approach. Most people filter out contradictory information because it threatens their sense of control and direction. Strategic thinkers actively seek contradictory information because it signals when adaptation is necessary. I developed the practice of regularly asking myself whether my current approach was still the best available option given current circumstances, not whether it was still workable. Most any approach can be made to work with enough effort, but whether it was still optimal. This distinction is crucial because resources spent forcing an outdated approach to work are resources unavailable for implementing a better approach. The balance between planning and improvisation requires understanding that plans are tools for thinking, not scripts for action. The planning process develops your understanding of the situation and your available options, but when circumstances change, you must be willing to abandon specific plans while retaining the understanding that created them. Adaptation speed often determines success more than initial strategy quality. The side that recognizes changing conditions first and adjusts most quickly gains. enormous advantages over opponents who are still operating based on outdated assumptions. This speed comes from mental preparation, not just tactical flexibility. I trained myself to expect change rather than stability, to view adaptation as normal rather than exceptional. This mental framework made me faster at recognizing when circumstances had shifted and more willing to adjust my approach before small changes became major problems. The rolled parchment that sits on my desk contains more strategic value than any weapon in my arsenal. It represents a message from one of my intelligence sources, a merchant who travels between kingdoms and observes changes in trade patterns, military preparations, and political relationships. Information like this determined the outcome of more battles than superior swordsmanship or tactical brilliance ever could. Information determines victory more than strength, because strength without direction is wasted energy, while accurate information about opponents' plans and capabilities allows even smaller forces to strike at exactly the right place and time. I built networks of reliable sources, not through bribery or coercion, but through understanding what people needed and helping them achieve their own objectives while gathering information in the process. The merchant who wrote this message benefits from my protection of his trade routes and my introductions to reliable business partners in regions where I have influence. In exchange, he shares observations about economic changes that signal political instability, military preparations that indicate planned campaigns, and resource movements that reveal strategic priorities. He doesn't see himself as a spy, he sees himself as a businessman with a valuable patron who appreciates useful information. This relationship illustrates the art of asking the right questions without revealing your intentions. I never ask my sources directly about military plans or political secrets. Instead, I ask about changes in their normal business environment. Have you noticed any unusual demand for certain supplies lately? Are there any new restrictions on travel or trade in the regions you visit? Have the people you work with seemed more worried or more confident than usual? People answer these questions honestly because they don't realize they're providing strategic intelligence. They think they're just making conversation with someone who takes a genuine interest in their work and experiences. My method for verifying information before acting on it involves cross-referencing multiple independent sources and looking for patterns, rather than relying on single reports. One merchant might misunderstand what he observes. Two independent sources reporting similar changes suggests something significant is happening. Three sources confirming the same pattern indicates information reliable enough to base decisions on. The patience required to build trust with valuable sources means investing time and resources in relationships that might not pay immediate dividends. Most commanders want intelligence right now about current problems. I learned to cultivate sources for information about future problems and long-term patterns. This meant maintaining relationships during peaceful periods when the information seemed less urgent but was actually more valuable. In modern professional environments, the same principles apply with different methods. The people who know what's really happening in your organization aren't necessarily the ones in formal leadership positions. Administrative assistants know scheduling patterns that reveal priorities. Its support staff understand technology changes that signal strategic shifts. Finance department employees see budget allocations that show what leadership actually values versus what they claim to prioritize. Building these intelligence networks requires genuine interest in other people's perspectives and challenges. You can't fake this interest effectively over time. People can sense when someone is extracting information versus when someone genuinely cares about understanding their experience and helping them succeed. Most people ignore available information or fail to ask the right questions to uncover it. They operate on assumptions and formal announcements while missing the early signals that could give them significant advantages. They wait for official confirmation of changes instead of recognizing the patterns that predict changes before they're announced. The key insight is that information flows through informal networks faster and more accurately than through official channels. Official communications are filtered, delayed, and shaped by political considerations. Informal observations from people doing actual work reflect reality more directly. I learned to value consistent small information from reliable sources more than dramatic revelations from unknown sources. Regular updates about normal patterns help you recognize when something unusual is developing. Dramatic information from unreliable sources is often designed to manipulate your decisions rather than inform them. The most valuable intelligence often comes from understanding what isn't happening as much as what is happening. When normal patterns change, when regular activities stop, when expected communications don't arrive, these absences of information can be more significant than the presence of dramatic news. In my collection sits a paper tiger, fierce-looking creation that appears formidable from a distance, but reveals its hollow nature upon close examination. This represents one of my most important discoveries about the relationship between actual strength and perceived strength. They are often completely opposite, and understanding this difference creates enormous strategic advantages. I learned to appear weak when strong and strong when weak, because controlling what others think they know about your capabilities allows you to shape their decisions in your favor. When enemies believe you are weaker than you actually are, they become overconfident and make mistakes that superior preparation allows you to exploit. When they believe you are stronger than you actually are, they often avoid confrontations that they could win, giving you time to improve your actual position. My experience defeating supposedly superior forces taught me that most demonstrations of strength are actually evidence of weakness. Commanders who constantly display their military might are usually trying to compensate for strategic vulnerabilities they hope enemies won't discover. Organizations that spend enormous resources on impressive facilities and ceremonies often lack the substance to back up their impressive appearances. I learned to recognize these patterns by asking myself what someone would do if they possessed genuine strength versus what they would do if they needed others to believe they possessed strength. Genuinely strong positions don't require constant demonstration. Actual capabilities speak for themselves through results, not through displays. The power of controlling perceptions without lying requires understanding the difference between deception and misdirection. Deception involves providing false information, which is both morally questionable and practically dangerous because lies must be maintained and can be discovered. Misdirection involves allowing others to reach incorrect conclusions based on incomplete information they gather themselves. I used misdirection by carefully choosing what information to make easily observable and what information to keep private. If I wanted enemies to believe my forces were larger than they actually were, I wouldn't lie about my numbers. I would conduct visible training exercises and supply movements that suggested larger forces without explicitly claiming they existed. If I wanted them to believe we were weaker than we actually were, I would emphasize our challenges and limitations, while keeping our new capabilities and preparations private. Managing perceptions requires understanding how people naturally interpret the information they observe. Most people see what they expect to see and interpret ambiguous information in ways that confirm their existing beliefs. By understanding these cognitive patterns, you can present information in ways that encourage useful misunderstandings without dishonest statements. The discipline required to maintain strategic ambiguity means resisting the natural human desire to be fully understood and appreciated. Most people want credit for their capabilities and recognition for their preparations. Strategic thinkers understand that being underestimated is often more valuable than being accurately assessed. This approach also requires careful judgment about when to reveal your actual capabilities. The element of surprise is valuable, but only if you can capitalize on it effectively. Revealing hidden strength at the wrong moment wastes the advantage, while waiting too long to reveal it might mean missing opportunities that require displaying your capabilities. I developed the practice of revealing my actual position gradually and strategically, showing just enough to achieve immediate objectives while maintaining uncertainty about my full capabilities. This kept opponents constantly guessing about what I could really do, which made their planning much more difficult, and my actual moves more effective. The formal challenge scroll that I refused to accept sits in my archive as a reminder of one of my most important strategic principles. Fighting every battle guarantees eventual defeat. The challenger was a respected general who questioned my tactics in front of other commanders. Honor demanded that I accept his challenge and prove my worth through single combat. Strategy demanded that I decline and preserve my energy for conflicts that actually mattered. Most people see declining a direct challenge as weakness or cowardice. Strategic thinkers understand it as resource management and priority alignment. Every battle you fight, whether physical, political, or professional, costs time, energy, attention, and political capital that won't be available for other battles. Fighting unnecessary battles leaves you depleted when necessary battles arise. I learned to distinguish between necessary and optional conflicts by asking myself, what victory in this particular battle would actually accomplish toward my larger objectives? If winning this fight would advance my strategic position significantly, it was worth considering. If winning would only satisfy my ego or temporarily silence critics, it was usually a distraction from more important work. The cost of winning the wrong battles extends beyond immediate resources. Every victory creates expectations for future victories. Every enemy you defeat through direct confrontation teaches other enemies how you operate and what approaches you're vulnerable to. Every dramatic success makes you a more attractive target for people looking to build their own reputations. My system for evaluating whether engagement serves my larger purpose starts with clearly understanding what that larger purpose actually is. Most people fight battles because they feel challenged or threatened in the moment, without considering whether the particular challenge relates to their long-term objectives. They let other people set their agenda by responding to every provocation. Strategic thinking means maintaining focus on your authentic priorities, regardless of what others do to distract or provoke you. This requires unusual mental discipline, because challenges to your competence or reputation create emotional pressure to respond immediately. Learning to pause and evaluate before responding is one of the most valuable skills you can develop. I developed the practice of asking myself several questions before engaging in any conflict. Is this battle necessary for achieving my actual objectives, or is it just emotionally satisfying? Will winning this battle make my strategic position stronger, or will it just make me feel better temporarily? What resources will this battle require, and are those resources available without compromising more important commitments? How to decline challenges without appearing weak requires understanding that true strength is demonstrated through results, not through accepting every test of your capabilities. I learned to redirect challenges toward areas where engagement would serve my purposes. I appreciate your interest in testing our tactics, but our upcoming campaign will provide a more meaningful demonstration than individual combat. Strategic withdrawal is often the path to ultimate victory because it preserves your resources while forcing opponents to expend theirs on objectives that don't advance their real interests. While they exhaust themselves fighting battles you chose not to fight, you're building strength for battles you chose to engage. The long-term thinking required for battle Selection means accepting temporary criticism or misunderstanding in exchange for lasting strategic advantage. Most people can't tolerate being misunderstood or underestimated, so they fight battles to manage their reputation rather than to advance their position. The ancient treaty seal pressed into wax beside my desk represents more than a political agreement. It represents the multiplication of individual capability through strategic partnership. Even the strongest cannot win alone, and understanding how to identify, cultivate, and maintain crucial alliances often determines success more than personal capability ever could. Why even the strongest cannot win alone became clear to me during a campaign where my tactical skills and military preparation were superior to every individual opponent I faced. Yet I was slowly losing ground because they had coordinated their efforts while I relied only on my own resources. Each enemy I defeated was quickly replaced by fresh forces. While my victories came at costs I couldn't sustain indefinitely, I learned to identify and cultivate crucial alliances by understanding that successful partnerships are built on mutual benefit, not just mutual sympathy. People align with others who can help them achieve their own objectives, not just with others they like or admire. The most reliable allies are those whose success depends partly on your success. The art of making yourself valuable to potential allies requires understanding their real needs and constraints, not just their stated preferences. A neighboring kingdom might claim they value honor and tradition above all else, but if they're facing economic pressure from trade disruptions, offering solutions to their economic problems will create stronger alliance potential than appeals to shared values. My experience turning enemies into partners taught me that most conflicts exist because of competing approaches to similar objectives, not because of fundamentally incompatible goals. When I took time to understand what former enemies actually needed to accomplish, I often discovered opportunities for cooperation that made our previous conflict unnecessary. The key insight was that many enemies are really potential allies who haven't yet recognized how cooperation could serve their interests better than competition. Instead of focusing on defeating them, I focused on demonstrating how alliance could advance their objectives more effectively than opposition. How to maintain independence while building coalitions requires clear agreement about what you will and won't compromise in exchange for alliance benefits. Before entering any partnership, I established my non-negotiable principles and objectives, then structured alliances to advance those principles rather than requiring me to abandon them. This balance prevents alliances from becoming dependencies, where you sacrifice your autonomy for temporary support. Healthy partnerships enhance your capabilities without requiring you to subordinate your judgment to others' preferences. Most people fail at building lasting strategic relationships because they focus on what they can get from the relationship rather than what they can contribute to it. They approach potential allies with requests and proposals that serve their own needs, without clearly addressing how the alliance serves the other party's needs. I learned to begin alliance conversations by demonstrating understanding of the other party's situation and offering solutions to their problems before discussing my own needs. This approach built trust and established my value as a partner before asking for anything in return. The patience required to build trust and mutual benefit means investing time and resources in relationships during periods when you don't immediately need the alliance benefits. Most people only think about building alliances when they're facing challenges they can't handle alone, which makes them appear desperate and reduces their attractiveness as partners. Strategic alliance building happens during times of strength, when you can offer genuine value without appearing needy. The relationships you build during good times become the resources you can draw upon during difficult periods. Successful alliances require regular attention and mutual support, not just formal agreements. The treaty seal represents the beginning of alliance benefits, not the completion of alliance building. The worn wooden staff that accompanied me through countless campaigns bears the marks of difficult decisions made in unclear circumstances. Leadership during uncertainty requires projecting confidence in your direction while maintaining internal flexibility about your methods, and this balance between decisive action and adaptive thinking determines whether people will follow you into unknown territory. I learned to maintain authority when outcomes were uncertain by understanding the difference between confidence in your ability to navigate challenges and confidence in your ability to predict specific results. Followers need to believe you can guide them through difficult situations, not that you can guarantee particular outcomes that may be beyond anyone's control. The difference between confidence and arrogance in leadership became crucial during a campaign where initial intelligence proved completely wrong and our planned approach became irrelevant within days of beginning. Arrogant leaders would have insisted on following the original plan to prove they were right. Confident leaders acknowledged the changed circumstances and adapted their approach while maintaining clear direction toward the ultimate objective. My method for making decisions with incomplete information involves gathering the best available information within the time constraints you face, then making the best decision possible with that information while remaining alert for new information that might require adjustments. Perfect information is rarely available when decisions must be made, but waiting for perfect information often means missing opportunities entirely. I developed the practice of clearly separating what I knew for certain from what I was assuming or hoping, then structuring decisions to minimize risk from incorrect assumptions while maximizing benefit from accurate information. This approach allowed me to act decisively without being reckless. How to project certainty while remaining internally flexible requires understanding that your role as a leader is to provide direction and confidence for others, not to eliminate all uncertainty from the situation. People can handle uncertainty about outcomes if they have confidence in the process and leadership guiding them through it. I learned to communicate certainty about principles, methods, and commitment while acknowledging uncertainty about specific outcomes and timing. We will find a way to achieve our objective projects, more useful confidence, then everything will work exactly as planned. Why followers need to see calm competence in their leaders relates to the psychological reality that uncertainty creates anxiety, and anxiety spreads quickly through groups unless someone demonstrates calm capability. Leaders who appear worried or confused multiplied the stress level of everyone around them, making effective decision-making more difficult for the entire group. This doesn't mean hiding all concerns or pretending everything is easy. It means demonstrating that you're capable of thinking clearly and acting effectively despite uncertainty and pressure. People need to see that their leader isn't overwhelmed by challenges they're facing together. How to admit mistakes without losing credibility requires distinguishing between errors in judgment and errors in character. Acknowledging that your information was incomplete or that circumstances changed unexpectedly demonstrates wisdom and adaptability. Admitting to poor preparation or dishonest communication damages credibility because it suggests fundamental leadership flaws. Practiced admitting tactical mistakes quickly while maintaining confidence in strategic direction. Our approach to this particular situation didn't work as expected, but our overall objective remains sound and we now have better information for our next attempt. The balance between decisive action and careful consideration means accepting that leadership in uncertain situations requires making decisions before you feel completely ready, then adjusting course as new information becomes available. Waiting for certainty often means missing the window when action can be most effective. This balance requires developing what I call comfortable uncertainty, the ability to move forward confidently despite incomplete information, while remaining alert for signals that require course corrections. Most people are either paralyzed by uncertainty or reckless in their attempts to eliminate it through premature action. The skill of leading through uncertainty involves creating structure and process that provide stability for your team even when specific outcomes remain unclear. People can handle not knowing exactly what will happen if they understand clearly what they're supposed to do and why their contributions matter to the overall effort. I learned to establish clear decision-making processes that could function effectively under changing conditions. Instead of detailed plans that would become obsolete quickly, I developed flexible frameworks that could accommodate new information and changing circumstances. While maintaining forward momentum, the communication strategy for uncertain situations requires regular updates that acknowledge what you don't know while emphasizing what you do know and what you're doing to address uncertainties. People lose confidence when leaders pretend everything is certain when they obviously aren't, but they maintain confidence when leaders demonstrate active engagement with uncertainty. I developed the practice of sharing my decision-making process with my team, explaining not just what we were going to do, but how I was thinking about the choices we faced. This transparency built confidence in my judgment even when specific decisions proved wrong, because people could see that decisions were based on sound reasoning given available information. The psychological demands of leading through uncertainty are significant because leaders absorb uncertainty and anxiety from their teams while projecting confidence and direction. This emotional labor requires personal practices for managing stress and maintaining perspective during difficult periods. I learned to separate my private process of working through doubts and concerns from my public role of providing direction and confidence. The wooden staff represented this dual nature of leadership, bearing weight privately while providing support publicly. The development of crisis leadership capabilities happens primarily through experience with uncertain situations, but it can be enhanced through deliberate practice during stable periods. I regularly placed myself in challenging situations where outcomes were unclear to build comfort with uncertainty and confidence in my ability to navigate through incomplete information. This preparation included studying how other leaders had handled similar uncertainties, developing decision-making frameworks that could function under pressure, and building relationships that would provide support and alternative perspectives during difficult periods. The simple business card on my desk represents how ancient principles of strategy apply perfectly to contemporary competitive environments. The battlefield may have changed from physical terrain to office politics, market competition, and digital networks, but the fundamental patterns of human behavior and strategic thinking remain remarkably consistent across thousands of years. Office politics mirror ancient warfare in ways that most people don't recognize because they focus on the surface differences rather than the underlying dynamics. The same principles that determined victory in territorial conflicts now determine success in professional environments: superior information, strategic positioning, alliance building, timing, and resource management. In modern workplaces, territory is defined by responsibility, influence, and decision-making authority rather than physical land. The battles are fought over budget allocations, project assignments, strategic direction, and recognition rather than cities and trade routes. But the strategic principles for winning these battles are identical to those that guided ancient military campaigns. I observe that modern people make the same strategic mistakes their ancestors made thousands of years ago. They focus on demonstrating their individual capabilities while ignoring the political and social context that determines how those capabilities will be received and rewarded. They work harder rather than positioning themselves more strategically. They fight every battle instead of choosing their conflicts wisely. How to apply situational awareness in professional environments requires understanding the real power structures information flows, and resource allocation processes that determine outcomes in your organization. Formal organizational charts show official reporting relationships, but real influence often flows through informal networks of trust, expertise, and mutual benefit. I learned to map these invisible structures by observing whose opinions are actually sought before important decisions, whose projects receive priority resource allocation, and whose recommendations are implemented without extensive debate. These patterns reveal where real power lies, regardless of what titles or positions suggest. Why positioning matters more in the information age, not less, relates to the acceleration of change and the multiplication of options available to decision makers. When everything moves faster and more alternatives exist, the ability to be in the right place at the right time with the right information becomes even more crucial for success. Digital communication and global connectivity create more opportunities for strategic positioning, but they also create more competition for attention and influence. The same principles that helped ancient strategists stand out in crowded fields of competitors now help modern professionals distinguish themselves in saturated markets and organizations. How to build strategic advantage in modern competitive landscapes involves understanding that most people still focus on tactics rather than strategy, on activity rather than positioning, on individual capability rather than systemic understanding. This creates enormous opportunities for those who think strategically about their career development, business building, and relationship management. The most successful modern professionals are those who understand how to apply timeless, strategic principles to contemporary challenges. They build intelligence networks through professional relationships. They position themselves advantageously within their organizations and industries. They choose their battles based on long-term strategic value rather than short-term emotional satisfaction. The timeless nature of human behavior and motivation means that the same psychological and social patterns that ancient strategists learned to recognize and influence still operate in modern environments. People still make decisions based on incomplete information, emotional reactions, and social pressures. They still respond predictably to certain types of influence and positioning. Technology changes the tools and accelerates the pace, but it doesn't change the fundamental reality that success comes from understanding yourself and your situation completely, then acting strategically based on that understanding. The ancient rule that makes you unbeatable works just as effectively in modern competitive environments as it did on ancient battlefields. The key insight is that most of your modern competitors aren't thinking strategically at all. They're just working hard and hoping for the best. This creates the same opportunities for strategic thinkers today that existed in ancient times. The acceleration of modern business cycles means that strategic advantages can be built and lost more quickly than in ancient times, but the fundamental principles for creating those advantages remain constant. The speed of change creates more opportunities for strategic positioning, but it also requires faster recognition of shifting conditions and quicker adaptation to new circumstances. Digital technology has democratized access to information while simultaneously creating information overload that makes strategic thinking more valuable, not less. Everyone has access to the same basic information, but few people have developed the skills to analyze that information strategically or to distinguish between signals and noise in rapidly changing environments. The modern strategic advantage lies in your ability to process information quickly and accurately, to recognize patterns that others miss, and to position yourself advantageously while others are still trying to understand what's happening. These capabilities develop through the same disciplined practice of self-knowledge and situational awareness that guided ancient strategists. Professional networking in the modern era follows the same alliance-building principles I used in ancient military campaigns. The most successful professionals understand that their network is their net worth, but they also understand that valuable networks are built through providing genuine value to others, rather than simply collecting contacts. The strategic approach to modern networking involves identifying people whose success would benefit from your success, then finding ways to support their objectives while advancing your own. This creates sustainable professional relationships rather than transactional exchanges that dissolve when immediate benefits are exhausted. Modern organizational dynamics mirror ancient court politics in ways that most professionals don't recognize. The same patterns of influence, alliance, and resource competition that determined success in ancient kingdoms now determine advancement in contemporary organizations. Understanding these patterns allows you to navigate modern workplace politics more effectively by recognizing the real power structures, identifying key decision makers and influencers, and positioning yourself to be valuable to people who control resources and opportunities. The global nature of modern competition means that strategic thinking must account for cultural differences, time zone challenges, and communication complexities that didn't exist in ancient warfare. However, these additional layers of complexity create opportunities for those who develop skills in cross-cultural strategic thinking. The same principles of understanding your situation completely now require understanding global economic trends, technological developments, and cultural shifts that affect your competitive environment. The scope is larger, but the fundamental approach, comprehensive situational awareness, remains identical. The worn journal beside my bed contains thousands of daily observations and strategic notes accumulated over decades of practice. Making strategic thinking a daily habit, rather than an occasional activity, is what separates those who occasionally have good insights from those who consistently make superior decisions. My routine for maintaining situational awareness begins each morning with 3 simple questions. What has changed in my environment since yesterday? What information have I gathered that contradicts my current assumptions? What opportunities or threats are developing that I should monitor more closely? These questions force me to actively look for changes rather than passively assuming stability. Most people operate on autopilot, noticing only dramatic changes while missing the subtle shifts that signal major developments coming. Daily attention to small changes allows you to recognize patterns and trends before they become obvious to everyone else. The questions I ask myself each evening focus on learning from the day's experiences. What worked better than expected, and why? What worked worse than expected, and why? What did I learn about myself, other people, or my situation that I didn't know this morning? How can I apply these insights to tomorrow's decisions? This daily reflection process prevents experience from becoming just a collection of events, and transforms it into accumulated wisdom that improves your future decision-making. Without deliberate reflection, you can repeat the same mistakes for years without recognizing the patterns. How to practice the one rule in small daily situations involves applying complete self-knowledge and situational awareness to routine decisions and interactions. Before sending an important email, pause to consider both your actual motivations and how your message will be received, given the recipient's current circumstances and pressures. Before entering a meeting, take a moment to assess your real objectives and the political dynamics that will influence how your contributions are received. Before making any request or proposal, consider both your authentic needs and the other person's constraints and incentives. These small applications of strategic thinking build the mental habits that allow you to think clearly under pressure. When larger stakes are involved, most people only try to think strategically during crises. When emotional pressure makes clear thinking more difficult, why consistency in small things creates capability in large things relates to the fact that Strategic thinking is a skill that improves with practice. The mental discipline required to assess situations clearly and act strategically develops gradually through repeated use in low-pressure situations. I learned that you can't suddenly become strategic when faced with major challenges if you haven't developed the habits of strategic thinking through daily practice. Under pressure, people default to their established patterns of thinking and decision-making. How to build strategic instincts through regular practice means training yourself to automatically notice strategic elements in every situation. Who has what information? Where are the real power and influence concentrated? What are people's actual motivations versus their stated reasons? How do current events fit into larger patterns? The patience required to develop mastery over time means accepting that strategic thinking is a long-term investment that pays dividends gradually rather than immediately. Most people want instant results from new approaches and abandon methods that don't produce immediate dramatic improvements. But strategic thinking compounds over time. Each day of better decisions builds on previous days of better decisions. Each relationship built strategically enhances future opportunities. Each situation assessed clearly provides information for future assessments. The daily practice journal becomes a record of your strategic development and a reference for future decisions. Patterns emerge from reviewing your observations over time that aren't visible from day-to-day experience alone. I learned to structure my journal entries to capture both specific observations and general principles that emerged from those observations. Each entry included what happened, how I responded, what worked well, what could have been improved, and what principles or patterns I noticed that might apply to future situations. This systematic approach to reflection transforms random experiences into accumulated strategic wisdom. Without deliberate analysis, you might live through the same types of situations repeatedly without learning the lessons they contain. With systematic reflection, each experience builds on previous experiences to develop deeper understanding. The habit of daily strategic thinking creates mental frameworks that automatically process new information and situations for strategic implications. Over time, this becomes intuitive. You naturally notice strategic elements that most people overlook because your mind has been trained to look for them consistently. This automation of strategic awareness is crucial because important strategic decisions often must be made quickly under pressure. If you haven't developed strategic thinking as a habitual process, you're unlikely to think strategically when it matters most. Under stress, people default to their established patterns of thinking and decision-making. The practice of applying strategic principles to small daily decisions develops the mental habits that enable strategic thinking in larger, more complex situations. Each time you pause to consider your real motivations before sending an email, you're strengthening the same analytical muscles needed for major strategic decisions. I developed specific daily exercises to maintain strategic thinking skills, analyzing news events for their broader strategic implications, observing social interactions for underlying power dynamics, reviewing my own decisions for strategic effectiveness, and practicing the rapid assessment of new situations for opportunities and threats. These exercises keep strategic thinking skills sharp during periods when major strategic decisions aren't required. Like physical fitness, strategic thinking requires regular exercise to maintain peak capability. Without consistent practice, these skills atrophy and become unavailable when needed most. The long-term perspective required for strategic thinking development means accepting that some benefits won't be apparent for months or years. Strategic thinking is an investment in future capability rather than immediate results. This delayed gratification conflicts with modern expectations for instant results from new approaches. The compound effect of daily strategic practice becomes apparent over time as your decision-making quality improves consistently across all areas of your life. Better strategic thinking improves your career decisions, relationship choices, financial planning, and personal development approaches simultaneously, because the underlying principles apply universally. The stone marker I placed at the edge of my vision during my final campaign represents the unlimited potential that comes from mastering strategic thinking. When you truly understand yourself and your situation completely, you become unbeatable, not because you're stronger than everyone else, but because you're operating from complete information while others operate from partial understanding and wishful thinking. The transformation that comes from mastering the one rule changes everything about how you experience challenges and opportunities. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by complexity, you feel equipped to navigate it. Instead of being surprised by setbacks, you anticipate and prepare for them. Instead of hoping for lucky breaks, you create advantageous conditions that make positive outcomes more likely. How your perspective changes when you truly know yourself, and your situation becomes apparent in the quality of decisions you make and the confidence with which you make them. You stop second-guessing yourself constantly because you understand the reasoning behind your choices. You stop being swayed by every new opinion or temporary setback because you have a clear foundation of self-knowledge and situational awareness. This clarity doesn't eliminate uncertainty from your life, but it eliminates the anxiety that comes from uncertainty. When you know yourself completely, you know you can handle whatever challenges arise. When you understand your situation completely, you know you can adapt to whatever changes occur. Why this approach makes you genuinely unbeatable over time relates to the cumulative effect of consistently superior decisions. Each strategic choice builds on previous strategic choices. Each relationship developed through genuine understanding creates opportunities for future relationships. Each challenge navigated successfully increases your capability for navigating future challenges. Your competitors will continue making decisions based on incomplete self-knowledge and partial situational awareness. They'll continue reacting to events rather than positioning themselves strategically. They'll continue fighting unnecessary battles while missing essential opportunities. Meanwhile, you'll be building systematic advantages that compound over time. My final advice for your strategic journey is to be patient with the development process while being urgent about the daily practice. Strategic thinking is a skill that develops gradually, but the benefits begin immediately when you start applying these principles to your daily decisions and interactions. The legacy you create by thinking and acting strategically extends far beyond your personal success. When you operate from complete understanding rather than emotional reaction, you make better decisions that benefit everyone affected by your choices. When you build genuine relationships based on mutual understanding and benefit, you create value for others while advancing your own objectives. How mastery of this principle serves not just you, but everyone around you becomes clear when you realize that strategic thinking leads to solutions that benefit multiple parties rather than zero-sum competitions where someone must lose for someone else to win. The invitation to carry forward these timeless principles is your opportunity to join the ranks of those who shape their circumstances rather than merely responding to them. The same rule that has kept leaders winning for over 2,500 years is now yours to apply to whatever challenges and opportunities you face. Know yourself and know your situation completely. Everything else follows from this foundation. The mastery of strategic thinking creates a transformation that extends far beyond achieving specific goals or defeating particular opponents. When you consistently operate from complete self-knowledge and situational awareness, you develop a way of being in the world that is fundamentally different from most people's reactive approach to life and challenges. This transformation manifests in increased confidence that comes not from arrogance or wishful thinking, but from accurate assessment of your real capabilities and realistic understanding of what you can accomplish under various circumstances. You stop doubting yourself unnecessarily, while also stopping overestimating your abilities in ways that lead to poor decisions. The ripple effect of strategic thinking touches every relationship and interaction, because you begin approaching others with genuine understanding rather than projection and assumption. When you truly understand your own motivations and constraints, you become much better at recognizing others' authentic needs and circumstances, which makes you more effective at building mutually beneficial relationships. Your influence grows naturally as people recognize that your advice and perspective consistently prove valuable, because they're based on careful analysis rather than emotional reaction or wishful thinking. Strategic thinkers become trusted advisors, because their recommendations account for real conditions and constraints rather than idealistic hopes. The legacy of strategic thinking extends beyond personal success to contribute to better outcomes for everyone affected by your decisions. When you make choices based on complete understanding rather than partial information, those choices are more likely to create value for multiple parties rather than just advancing your narrow interests at others' expense. Strategic thinking leads to innovation because it reveals opportunities that others miss and solutions that others don't consider. When you understand situations completely, you often discover approaches that appear impossible to people operating from incomplete information or false assumptions about what's truly required for success. The freedom that comes from strategic mastery is perhaps its greatest benefit. When you understand yourself and your situation completely, you stop being controlled by others' expectations, social pressures, or circumstances beyond your control. You make choices based on your authentic values and realistic assessment of opportunities rather than reacting to external demands and pressures. This freedom doesn't eliminate challenges or guarantee specific outcomes, but it ensures that you're always operating from your strongest possible position given current circumstances. You become unbeatable not because you never face difficulties, but because you never face them unprepared or from disadvantaged positions that could have been avoided through better strategic thinking. The stone marker at the edge of vision represents unlimited potential because strategic thinking is a capability that can be applied to any challenge or opportunity you encounter throughout your life. Master this foundation, and everything else becomes possible.